Thanks for coming out on a wintry night. My name is Stephen Hoodlet. I'm the Director of Economic Vitality for the town. We have a number of town staff, public safety officials, select board members, binding board members, and all the residents who are here. Thanks for coming. I'm going to do a pretty brief intro to kind of give some background for the project, and then our guest from Wireless Towers will really take it away and have the bulk of the time before the questions. Just briefly, I mentioned being the Director of Economic Vitality. Just to give a little background, people tend to think about business development, bringing in industry, land development. The vitality angle there, if there's a difference, it's really to focus on the relationship between these activities and residents and their quality of life. And I really think of this project as a focus for that kind of public good. In terms of kind of where we've come from, I'm going to go through the project history real quick, talk about the public process, and then hand it off. The 3 points I want you to come away with real briefly is one, we do have communications issues, and they're ones that are sort of worsening over time. The second one is that the proposal that we have together for tonight, we're going to go into as much detail as we can, answer as many questions as we can. It's sort of a culmination of a lot of work and has been a pretty thoughtful process. And the third thing is that this is the first major public engagement piece. There's been a number of public meetings in other venues, especially with the select board, the planning board. But this is one of what's going to be a series of other ones, and we're going to go through those as well to kind of let you know how else you can be involved and give feedback if you're interested. So, I listed up here just some of the past studies, reports, investigations of kind of what the town could use to really improve its well-being, and communications is something that has come up again and again. But we didn't need consultants to know that. People yell about it all the time. It's been known for some time in town, especially on Route 1, that cell coverage for certain carriers is a challenge. And I want to make just a distinction here. Back in 2009, it was a little bit more of a choice and opt-in in terms of whether or not you're going to be digitally inclined. Whereas increasingly, that's not really consumer choice. It's something where to get access to the things you already have, whether it's financial services, health services, or otherwise, the companies are kind of making the choice for you, and they use it for security purposes to make sure they know who you are. So this is not exactly a public utility, but it's something that increasingly is kind of central to daily life. So this first phase was kind of making sure that this was a problem that was consistent and needed attention. Kind of later on, this was taken up by the Economic Development Committee. This is the EDC, which I am a liaison to. That was the work of Steve Sawyer and June Houston, who are on the connectivity subgroup. And they did a lot of work kind of figuring out, okay, this is the problem, how do we fix it? And that was learning about the industry, learning about tower designs, learning about RF coverage, understanding the expansion cycles of the carriers and kind of when they invest and how. And they put together a master plan for wireless communications that was kind of the work that I picked up. So I've been here almost 2 years, working on this in some of that time. Through that work, we kind of came to a crossroads last spring where we were working with tower companies, working with connections to carriers in the industry, as well as people nearby in town who kind of work in this space. And it was clear that something had changed where either because people were doing remote work or there was more people in town, the carriers were finally serious about solving this problem. They were ready to invest in Kennebunk. But it's not that you always get to just kind of pick where you want them to go. So there's a lot of coordination in terms of how you make it happen. And with all this groundwork, we didn't have anyone stepping forward. We didn't have anything in hand. So the staff decision at the time was to kind of make it a competitive process. And that's why we went forward with a request for proposals. So this was a case we made to the select board formally in July of last year. Then we put out an RFP in August, received 4 proposals that came back in October. And since then, we've been working with a team to score those proposals and try to find the best partner for the town. Um, so the scoring team was made up of town staff. We had our town planner, so we made sure we understood the ordinance ramifications and things related to the buildings. We had our finance director to understand the fiscal needs and perhaps benefits to the town. And we had 2 residents who have subject area knowledge. They're both here today. I don't know if they want to be recognized, but Eric Vanderkay and Bob Gobiel gave a lot of time and effort to kind of make sure that we did the best job we could on this. So let's see, site location, public RFP. So I'm going to let them handle most of the details. I'll just mention 2 things in terms of kind of big decisions. One was the location. You think of a tower, you think if you want height, and you think about the location we have, and it's sort of off to the side of downtown and kind of down at the bottom of the hill. And a lot of people have mentioned that to me, and I appreciate that. So part of the reason is, we wanted to be sensitive to what the existing rules are and pay attention to land use. So for telecommunications facilities, you can only do it in 2 zones in town. That's business park and industrial. And there's only a handful of places around town where those zones exist that made sense for this project, right? So the constraints for the site were, 1, you had to be able to fit a tower. So you needed a piece of land big enough to put the buildings. 2, the market wanted to be there. Like I said, it's not something where if you build it, they'll come. It's more like you have to do this dance to make sure you have the right spot. And we wanted something that was close to what the market demand was around Route 1, around the downtown. I mentioned zoning and land use. We're a heavily residential community, so it's very hard to find a place that's near the action and not near someone's backyard, right? I didn't pick up this project because I knew people really wanted to have a tower in their backyard and would thank me for it. It was mostly, this was a need. And this location is in the industrial zone. It's near a lot of other utility and industrial uses, and it's pretty tucked away. It's both visually and also in terms of distance to other uses. We think it's a good location. And the final thing was we wanted site control. The problem's been known for a long time, but we haven't had any private landowners come forward with a proposal that's been successful for this area. So having site control was useful so that we could move the project forward, and also so that we could have the top spot to locate our public safety equipment. And we'll talk more about that later. The second thing, I mentioned the scoring team just before, and I want to talk about how we structured the request for proposals and how we used that to find the partner we ended up with. So I mentioned that the carriers are really driving the show. In order to construct and maintain a tower, you need commercial carriers to be financially viable. So having a team that could do that was a key part of what we structured the RFP for. So it's 51% was having someone that could do that. Next, we wanted a spot for public safety. I mentioned that. Third is we wanted to have someone that had the experience. Wireless edge towers basically has a service line that's specific for partnering with municipalities. They do a lot of exactly these kinds of projects. And then finally was the financial considerations, is what is the town going to get out of it in terms of benefits. And there's some information on our project page, and also I think we'll see some tonight about what those look like. Besides having the tower where it is and people giving me feedback on the location, the other feedback was, what about the money? How come that's last, right? We're in budget season. Why doesn't the town care about the money? And I think that the 2 short answers are, 1, even though we think the remunerations will be a positive impact for the town, they're still pretty small relative to overall revenues. They're a relatively modest financial consideration for the town in general. But 2, this is a competitive market where all the people who proposed, they were pretty close on price, so the difference between proposals was even less. So it's just something where we knew that we would be competitive. It wasn't something we thought was as important as having the right team, getting the carriers, and having the best situation for our public safety. So we'll go through the public process really quick. We're here tonight at the neighborhood meeting. Again, this is kind of the first big public outreach. There was a planning board meeting on Monday where we moved forward a zoning amendment. One of the steps in the project eligibility is having one of the performance standards adjusted so that the planning board has the flexibility to site a tower on this site at Factory Pasture Lane. The next public hearing for that zoning amendment is going to be March 10th. So this is the next step. If people want to come and give feedback on that, this is a good opportunity. That will go to a town vote in June, and that will have its own process. At the same time, once the zoning amendment hopefully passes, the town manager, who is authorized by the select board, can begin to negotiate the land lease. So it's town land. That was a key part of the point. We'll negotiate a land lease with the tower builder, who will own and maintain the infrastructure, and then we'll have a spot on top. So it's sort of like this sandwich arrangement. The land lease also will go to town vote, and it'll have its own public process. And that's all before the actual project itself, the tower, the accessory buildings, the way the site is handled, that will have its own project application and permitting process, which will follow all regular rules. So hopefully this gives a sense that this is, again, not the first time we've mentioned this project in public, but our first attempt to reach out to as many people as possible, let them know about it, and that there's a lot still to come. So the gentleman to my left here that I haven't introduced yet, this is John Arthur and Sam Humanak. They're from Wireless Edge Towers. They interviewed with us in late January when we had 2 finalists, and we thought that they kind of proved out what their RFP had said in paper, that they knew their trade, they were a reliable partner, that they've done a lot of projects like this in communities like Kennebunk, and that they, they had the capacity and the professional talent to deliver. So without further ado, who's up first? But John, if you want to take over.
All right, thank you, Steve. And thank you, folks, for having us come here to present this project. My name is John Arthur. I'm President and CEO of Wireless Edge Towers. Also with me is Sam Humanek, who came in today from Texas. Sam is our Vice President of Business Development. So I get involved in a lot of the front end of these projects, design, leasing, just establishing the basic project parameters. Sam's the guy that gets in there with the wireless carriers and attracts them to the site to get them in the neighborhood. So I probably overdid it on putting together the slide pack, so there's a lot of slides, but I'll go through some of the more general stuff pretty quick and try and get to the meat of the presentation. And just one thing of note, all the photographs in the presentation are Wireless Edge sites that we developed. And just for an example, we do a lot of water tank sites. It's in Baltimore County and really other parts of the country. The center, the bottom is Homer, Alaska. So we really work nationwide. We've got about 10 sites up in Alaska now. So we're not afraid of the cold. A little bit about the company. We've been operating since 1998. Again, we focus our business on governmental properties. So north of 95% of our properties are on public schools, DPW yards, fire departments, police stations, parks, all sorts of projects. And we're operating in a little over 15 states right now. We also do various other network design and deployment projects. We've done municipal Wi-Fi systems. We've consulted on landmark and historic districts. And we get a lot involved in custom designs of towers. So just like real quick, this is our staff. It's really broken into 2 chunks. So on the left side is our headquarters in Rhinebeck, New York. And a lot of our folks are actually remote. So for example, our operation guy is based out of Cape Cod. And on the right side is our Ohio office. That's co-located with our investors. They provide a lot of the financial support and the funding for the projects. And we're funded by a company called Peppertree Capital Management. They're a $6 billion equity fund, and they fund all our towers since 2010. Just a little bit about where we work, some of the projects. We've done projects at Kennedy Space Center. We work with the Archdiocese of New York, Collier County Public Schools. That's a fairly new project for us, and it's very successful so far. We're doing a lot of work with the Forest Preserves of Cook County. So we're doing a number of public schools, colleges, some military projects, and various other agencies around the country. And this is just an example of some of our key relations. We have about 800 public properties under management. Probably about 50% or more of those are school properties. And we also have some, as I mentioned before, some non-tower projects, like our NASA project. We've done work with the Weather Service, the Army, the Cherokee Nation, and we did a municipal Wi-Fi system in New Rochelle, which we operated for about 6 years. So just a little bit about the general benefits to the town. We're wireless tower experts. We've been doing this for 26 years. So we're very familiar with the leasing, the design of the towers. We get involved in every aspect of it. We don't really outsource the whole project and project management. We manage it ourselves. So our team personally visits the sites. We're very familiar with each project. Because we do a lot of public tower projects, including managing rooftop leases and water tanks, we view ourselves in a watchdog role. So we have projects, for example, where we collect revenue from the wireless carriers that would otherwise go directly to the agency. We evaluate those, make sure every penny is accounted for, and we do all the financial reporting and accounting to the agency. And so we do that on a smaller scale on individual tower sites. But because of that, we also get involved a lot in looking at existing leases that towns have where maybe something went wrong and they want to figure out, what's the best fast path forward, or how can they improve that situation, or how can they deal with the wireless carriers on particular issues. Again, we also operate ourselves in an engineering role, so we don't let the wireless carriers do the structural analysis on the towers. We have a third-party engineering company that manages all our towers structurally. And so once it goes from the manufacturer to our inventory, we take over the structural analysis, aspect of the job. And that includes the municipal antennas as well. Whoops. So generally with wireless edge, it's a very high level of care. We personally know our sites, and they're part of our family, so it's not just a tower that we've never seen before. So a little bit about the pricing of the project. It's basically a revenue sharing model where and just to back up a little bit, what we do is we have a lease with the town. We then sublease to the wireless carriers. So it's almost like a real estate business with a building where someone owns the building, they lease out floors or offices to tenants, and they collect the rent. So in this case, our tenants are the wireless carriers, we collect the rent, and we pay a revenue share to the town. So as part of that, there's some bonus payments. So every time we sign a wireless carrier, there's a $5,000 bonus payment to the town. There's also renewal bonuses. So the renewals are set up in 10-year periods. So at each renewal is an additional 10 years. And there's also options for the town to accelerate those to authorize future. It's a way of also authorizing future renewals, but also accelerating the revenue to the town. So it's like money in the bank for the town. That adds up to $40,000 based on 4 major carriers in the market. So right now the industry is consolidated down to 4. So you have AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Dish Wireless. T-Mobile merged with Metro PCS, so you don't see them anymore. They also merged with Sprint, so you don't see them anymore. Likewise, AT&T merged with Singular a while back, so you don't hear about them anymore. So it's really 4 major carriers. There's other tenants potentially on the site as well. We do a lot of outside public agencies that want access, utilities, Wi-Fi companies. So there's other revenue opportunities besides the actual major wireless carriers. some minimums in there. So the way that works, if you were to look at 75% for the first carrier, and you assumed a $30,000 a year lease, which is modest, but not overly aggressive, that equates to $22,500 and a 2% annual escalation. All the wireless carriers have been trying to push down the rents over the last 10 years, so they're kind of playing a game of getting more equipment rights and paying less rent. So we try to find a balance where we want to attract them to the town, not have them go after private properties, or not go to other towns. Now, also in our proposal is bill of materials for the town's installation of their public safety antennas. So normally on our towers, we give free access to the town, local first responders, to go on the tower. Very often in our proposals, we also will install that equipment. So typically a town radio consultant provides a list of equipment, the town buys the equipment, we'll install while we're building the site. So we've taken this project a step further. We're providing everything they need except the radios. So that includes equipment cabinets or equipment shelter, antenna mounts, antennas, cables, all the installation of those materials, really just ready to stuff the electronics into a rack. So that's probably about a $75,000 to $100,000 value for the town. We also have monetization options. That's something that the town may want to look at down the road. In the industry, there's private companies and tower companies that will buy out the lease. They convert the lease to a 99-year easement and pay a lump sum to the town. So it's a nice way of having, a surge of revenue and reducing any risk that a carrier is going to leave. But we always recommend to our clients, don't do that on day one. Wait a little bit. The more carriers you have on the tower, the more that's going to be worth. So a little bit more, so let's talk about the site itself. So the site is on Factory Pasture Lane. It's a little triangular property. It's fairly well, surrounded by woods, and it backs up to Wildlife Sanctuary, the Water and Sewer District, which are right here to the west and to the south. And I'll show you a little more detail on the next slide. I'll show you some photographs. So this is on leaf-on conditions. You see that the site's roughly where the arrow is. It's pretty well surrounded by trees, which means in the summer, it's going to be very difficult to see that site. Here's a winter view. So you see some pine trees, so you still have leaf on there, but you still have a good amount of vegetation surrounding the site. There is an existing utility run that goes through the woods there, and there's also a water main that goes underground through that path as well. And there's a driveway, you see it up here. Right now there's some telephone poles being stored in these areas, but there's an existing access road that we plan to utilize. So here's the general layout. We're coming off Factory Pasture right here. This is the existing driveway, and there's a gate. I believe the gate is right about there somewhere, going to the next property over, which is the water and sewer. The red line represents the utility line, which goes right through the property. That makes things a little difficult construction-wise. And the water main goes in a parallel path. We're assuming that there's a 30-foot wide easement. I don't believe it's an official easement, but for planning purposes right now, we just assumed it's a 30-foot wide keep-away swatch. So to access the site, we would come off Factory Pasture. We'd make an offshoot driveway, and the yellow area is an area that we would clear for parking and turnaround. We also need to get into the property. Our preference would be not to erect the tower over the utility lines. So we don't want to bring a crane and have to lift the tower and install over. So we want to have enough room inside the property so that we can stage that crane and not have to go over those lines. And then our compound is tucked back in the corner of the property. Let's see. So a more detailed view. The monopole tower is located roughly central. There's a double swing gate to get into the compound. Each of these boxes represents an equipment area that a wireless carrier would use. Average is 12 by 24. Some carriers use a little bit less, some use a little bit more, but that's about the average. Some of those are shelters, and some of those are just equipment cabinets. There's also cable, we call it ice bridge or waveguide bridges that transport the carrier's cables back and forth. So we like to plan the facility very well so that the carriers are nicely organized around the tower. The cables are, can go directly to the tower, and you still have room to walk around and bring equipment in and out. This box over here represents the municipal shelter, or it could be a concrete pad with cabinets, whatever the town prefers. And then we're also providing the town with a backup generator to support their system. And that's typically generated much like you see at your home, typically a 22 kVA type unit, like a Generac or a Kohler. Then we would have a transformer, typically outside, surrounded by bollards. Until we get with the utility company, we won't know that exact design. They may want to put a pole top transformer off one of these poles. So there's a pole right there. But for now, we're just assuming that we're going to trench over to a new transformer. And then we'd have a meter bank where we locate the carrier's meters, a meter for the town, and also a fiber cabinet. The other thing that I'm showing here is a little area for propane tanks. So the carriers typically will have backup generators, just like the town will have a backup generator. A lot of those generators operate off of propane or diesel or natural gas. So we're assuming we're not going to get natural gas, so it's going to be diesel or propane. If it's propane, we like to have a separate little area that a truck can get in and fill the tanks outside of the compound without having a propane service have to come into the compound. So we've had some discussions with the town about the zoning, and the town is going for a zoning amendment. So I thought I would show some of the parameters there. So it is in an industrial area. So it is one of the preferred areas for a cell tower. There is a couple of setbacks in the code. So there's a 50-yard front setback, which is what this line represents right here. So that's 50 feet. We're assuming it's we showed it to the edge of the carrier's equipment pad, but that really is based on interpretation. It might be to the actual equipment, or it may even be just to the tower. But we do make that. There's also a 35-foot setback, which we would make from the rear lot line. And there's also a 35 from the side yard. It's really like the rear and the side are essentially the same because it's a triangle. We would likely not make that. We probably could, but I'm trying to balance out the best site design, maybe at the expense of having to go to ZBA for variances, because I want to try and push the site as far back in the corner as possible. And if it's an extra variance for that, it's probably a worthwhile trade-off. The code also has 125% of tower height setback. So that's represented by the outer circle. And I calculate that based on 176-foot tower. Municipal antennas could be as high as 20 feet whips. So I've added that on and then applied the setback. So that's the calculation. So that's a 245-foot radius. And the nice thing about that in this particular location is it overlaps a municipal property, governmental use, and a wildlife area that's really not going to be disturbed. So there's no residences in that radius. We also have an alternate, which is used in a lot of towns, where we call it a fold-over design. It's a little bit of a silly term, but effectively what we do is we beef up the bottom of the tower so that the tower would have only half of the radius. They call it a fall zone. We've never actually had a tower fall, but it's in a lot of the codes. So that's one way of addressing that. And that's represented by the inner circle, which is completely self-contained. It doesn't even overlap the road. So we're proposing a brown monopole. So most monopoles are galvanized. Some are painted. We tend to paint it, particularly if it's in the context of trees and woods, where if you're looking through the trees, I think that looking at, it's gonna be harder to see a brown pole than a shiny galvanized pole. And that's what we're proposing here. It's still galvanized, but then we send it to a paint shop and we have an epoxy paint put over it. And then we make the carriers paint all their equipment on top of the tower brown as well. So there's just some examples. This particular one over here is a site we just built in Rhinebeck. It's a 200-foot monopole. You see, it says Verizon's equipment, which they just installed about a week ago. At the top, we typically have various mount configurations for the town. Could be a 4-way mount, or could be an 8-way mount. That's going to depend on what the town wants to put up. And then here's just a couple of other examples. Salisbury, Connecticut. This is Shirley, Mass. It's actually located at the Shirley Correctional Facility. And Lakewood, New Jersey is located at a public park. This is that same Rhinebeck Tower. Just shows you the ground view. We had the actually owner of the property. Turns out he had a plane ride over the property because he developed a large automotive center there, and he took some pictures, so we had a nice aerial view of the tower. This was during the construction, before the Verizon install. So you see, it's just this was a 75 by 75 compound. Right now, it's just rock in there, and we built a paved access road coming up from his main facility with a little gravel turnaround area. And down here, you see again, very typical to what we're proposing here: transformer with some bollards, a meter bank. This is Verizon's equipment back here under this little canopy. And this is their cable bridge. It's a little hard to see here, but it conveys their cables back and forth. And all the cables go up inside the pole. Just another example facility. This one's in Lakewood, New Jersey. It's adjacent to a public park. Right now we have 3 carriers on the site. So I just gave you a couple aerials to see how that was set up. And actually, from a distance, you can see it pretty much blends with the existing light towers in the park. So we conducted a visibility analysis called a view shed analysis. And it's a spatial analysis that we have a consultant that does all the visibility work conduct. And they use LiDAR data to determine the height of the trees in an area. And based on that, they predict where you can see the tower. The general rule of thumb is, if you've got a stand of trees right in front of you, you're not going to see a tower, no matter how high the tower is. If you're looking across a football field and the tower is in the background, that's when you're going to have an opportunity to see that tower above the trees. And what we see here, and I'll show you a little detail in the next shot. So the actual visibility is really only this little yellow area, which is probably one of the best ones I've seen. Typically, we see a splotch near the site, and we see open areas. Just the way the terrain is and the trees, the visibility is really very well contained, even with a 176-foot monopole. So I believe there was an acreage, let's see, it's about 8 acres of visibility in a leaf-on condition, and about 60, let me see, probably a better shot looking at it up here. No, blurry. It's about 60 acres visibility leaf off.
And this visibility analysis is based upon winter conditions, summer conditions?
It's both. So that's a good question. So and let me just go to the next slide, because it'll be a lot easier to see. So the bright yellow, that would represent year-round. Let's see. Let me make sure I get this right. So this is seasonal visibility, which means that you're going to. So here we have a key. So the 62 acres, that's seasonal visibility, and the bright yellow is year-round visibility. So the bright yellow is, you know, any time of the year. And the, where is it? Is that working? Yeah. So this little area here is that it's going to be visible all year round. The yellow splotch with the mustard color splotch is seasonal. So when the leaves are on the trees, you're not going to see it.
Excuse me. Two questions. You talked about the trees and seeing it above the trees. In your circles, your two circles, what's the average height of the trees? And maybe Steve, get into my second question, which I can't tell whether our streets are in your yellow
Yep.
or not. Steve, can you tell us like the streets that are bounding that yellow, like where is the?
Sure.
I
So,
don't know what the bounds are.
right. So right here, right in this line right here, that's Water Street. So that's the road that goes right down the middle of the industrial area. Right here, again, it's really hard to see. Actually, probably best on here.
So you see the green element sort of in the top middle? I think that's centered right around Parsons Field. And you can see just to the kind of southwest of it, you can see Grove Street come down. And that's where,
Those two green things are.
I think the green is right around Parsons Field and the tennis court.
So the green is just an indication there's a park there.
And why is there yellow's bad, right? Why is there yellow?
Because probably there's a wide open field, so if you were to go in that field, you would see it over the trees.
That was the first question, which is how much higher than the trees is it?
So we know that the trees in the immediate site, and it varies, but there are trees that are range about 83 feet is what they told me. 83, right? So the trees vary between 65 and in the 80s, depending on where you are.
So it averages about 100 feet above the tree line.
So if you, that's correct. So if you had an average of 70, you'd be 100 feet. But really, it's all about where you're standing and where the site is and what's in front of you. So we did a photo simulation. So I took this photo. This is back on Water Street. This is the area where it's the most visibility. And these trees back here are about 80, 85 feet. So the engineers calculated where the tower was. Now the tower is set back in the woods. And you can see you've got a large field in front of it. So you got a good opportunity to see something above the trees. When you simulate that, that's the tower. It's actually below the tree line. It doesn't stick above at all. And that's 580 feet away. And that's because from where you're standing to where the trees are, it's about 275 feet. So if you did like a line of sight analysis, you can see that the trees would block the view based on the angle.
Are you planning on doing any field visibility, not photo simulation, but field visibility evaluations for the neighbors and everybody to see?
We are. So typically when we do these view shed analysis, that's the precursor to a visibility study that's more definitive, because nothing tells the real visibility except by putting up a balloon, having someone go around, and we'll go around and take 30 shots, every possible location that's predicted it would be visible, and as many others as we can find. So it's typically a whole day. Typically that's done as part of the planning and zoning process. So now it's something we may want to do earlier, because it's the best time to do that is in the winter.
Correct, I would just
Yeah.
do the winter and the summer, I would do both.
I don't know if I would do this. So first of all, these things are very expensive. So we prefer not to do both. I mean, it's something like $12,000 for a visibility study, because not only do they do the study, but then they go and they do photo simulations like this one on each of those photos. So anything where the site is visible through the trees or above the trees, they'll do a simulation. So if you don't see it in the winter, then you're definitely not gonna see it in the summer. It wouldn't be the other
I
way.
can see it in both.
Well, if you're gonna see it, you're gonna see it in winter. So knowing that you're not gonna see it in the summer, and I'll show you some examples in the next couple of slides.
What's the zoning, what floodplain is this on?
I'm sorry.
What floodplain? We've learned anything from Hurricane Helene. We know that some of those towers wasn't the wind that knocked them down, it was a landslide, and it was sweat. But this is by most of you, so what floodplain is it on? 5-year floodplain, 10-year floodplain, 100-year floodplain, 500-year floodplain?
Yep.
What floodplain is it on?
So-
Something I didn't mention earlier, but we're recording this for those who wanted to watch it afterwards. And since we have the audio through the mic, do you mind repeating the questions in the mic?
Oh, sure. So we were just like talking.
I mean, regular talking, but just make sure you repeat the question.
Oh, sure. I didn't check the like the FEMA floodplains. I know there's wetlands near the site, but not on the site.
So you don't know if that floodplain, if that's even a good site, it's in the 50, it's not, it's not, that has to be on a floodplain, maybe 1,000-year floodplain.
So it's not in the special flood hazard area, which up at that area, the school district makes the boundary. If you think about that, from just up to the edge of Rogers Pond, that area hasn't been updated with new maps, new boundaries, no. When you sit up above at elevation 9, what's still mapped, under the 100 floodplain, this is up around, I think, 14 to 15. You've got some elevation compression.
Now, even if there was a floodplain issue, and it depends on what it is, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't build a site there. It just means that the equipment has to be raised above that floodplain elevation. So if it's only a foot or two, we just built one in New Jersey where there was a 3-foot floodplain. So it went in, but all the equipment had to go up on platforms. So here's a couple of views from various distances of actual towers looking through the trees. And these represent what I believe to be the predominant views that you're going to see when you're looking at the tower in the winter. So as you can see, the brown tower, as indicated by the blue arrow, is pretty well hidden. And that's why I like the brown painting of the pole versus a galvanized finish. And keep in mind that these trees that we're looking at are only about 60 feet high. That pole which is 450 feet away, is 200 feet high. So that shows you how the angle works to hide the tower.
I wasn't sure how my intuition would line up with this. I was in preparation, I went out to West Kennebunk where they have the tower for the turnpike, which is a very comparable, I think it's a slightly taller tower. And I just took a few different vantage points. I went down to Village Tavern, which is right around the corner from the turnpike. And in the winter, through the trees, I was taking pictures. And when I went back to the pictures, I had trouble finding the equipment in the pictures, right, from that close distance. So I was even surprised by how well the tree cover serves, even in the winter. Obviously, every vantage point is going to be a little different.
The elevation of the residences on Parking Grove Street is a lot higher than that land. Has that been considered? Because obviously you're coming from a much higher vantage point looking.
You'd have to show me where that's on the map. But we covered a 2-mile radius on that map.
Go back to the next slide, go to the slide you're just at, the one you just had zoomed in.
Just
Keep going.
one more?
One more.
Okay.
Go to the far right, and so, do you know where Groveland Park Street is?
No, is that,
Right next to the, right, show it.
So I think what we're talking about is the main corridor that's all in yellow is the worst visibility shed.
Mhm.
And to the downward and leftward from that, the elevation slopes down. But in the other direction, when you go to the right and up, the elevation goes up. And I think the question is, does the visibility analysis incorporate that elevation change?
okay, so it does. So the visibility analysis takes the ground elevation, which they know the ground elevation in the whole area, then it takes the tree cover. So it takes into account that angle, whether you're at a higher vantage point or whether you're lower.
But, I'm just looking, I mean, I know that you're probably, for looking at that map, say that Park Street, Grove Street, and Winter Street are most impacted by visually, looking at the yellow, and that's just based upon your initial visibility, analysis, but that's those houses are impacted because we're higher elevation.
Yeah.
You're up.
But it also means that if they're at high elevation, the tower is effectively lower because the tower is down. So if it was 30 feet higher, that makes the tower look 30 feet lower. So,
I'm looking
yeah.
at your data, looking at your yellow data, where it's spreading into the residential neighborhood, I'm just interpreting that, that's all I'm doing.
Right.
And so it's showing that Winter Street, Park Street corner at Grove, that area, those houses will be visually impacted.
And also keep in mind, in this area,
Correct.
these are views looking through the trees. So you're looking through hundreds of feet of trees at the site. They're just saying that based on the prediction, it could be visible. Now, when we go out and do these balloon tests, and it's a whole day event, and it's very difficult to see something, we'll put up either a crane or a balloon on a string. It's a 5-foot diameter red balloon, so that's gonna be the most visible thing you're gonna see. Even then, we have a lot of difficulty seeing the site, particularly if it's below the trees. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of, pulling over to the side of the road and standing in a little area and then moving a couple inches this way and a couple, just to try and see if you can find it. And so we take the worst possible photos we can find. But looking through trees, it's pretty difficult. Here's another example. So this is now about 1,400 feet away. And, even with the red balloon, when we did the test on this, it was extremely difficult to find. And if you move a foot or two in one direction or the other, you lose it. In fact, I went back, I just took these photographs last weekend, and, just to find the view where the tower was, I had to, move around quite a bit. And again, here's a view from about 1,400 feet. You could barely see just a little piece of it. The more trees you have in between, even without the leaves on, and you can see it's not even close to the top of the trees. So, a little bit about the use of the tower for the town. I did cover some of this earlier, but this is really just a list of the items that we're providing as part of the offer package. So we already reviewed, so the tower will not need to be lit at night. There's a program you can run, it's called TOWAIR. It's an FCC program where you put in the height of the tower and any antennas and the coordinates. It'll run a pre-screening of it and let you know if there's any issues. So it'll determine, well, because there's a runway 4,000 feet away and you're above that, they call it an imaginary plane, therefore you'd have to file with the FAA, file with the FCC. They'll recommend whether they need lights or not. We already screened it and it's not a problem. There's also a general rule that if you're over 200 feet, you have to light it regardless of the circumstances. So we're well below that. And that's kind of why we like the height of the tower at 176 is designed so a wireless carrier can go at 170. Now the other commercial levels below that, 160, 150, 140, and a few spare below that. And then the top 6 feet is reserved to mount the town equipment. So that gets you to 176. Even if you put a 20-foot whip antenna on there, which is very hard to see anyway, they're only a couple of inches wide, that would still be below. So that would be 196, you're still below the 200-foot level. So there would be no reason to light the tower.
So I just want to get clarification on that. So the pole itself, the galvanized steel pole itself is 176?
176.
And then the town is going to install something that's going to be 20 feet above that?
Well, we don't know what their town's antennas are. From a planning standpoint,
Do we know what it's going to be? It's going to be above?
So Carl, I'm not sure if you have information you could describe tonight or if you want to try to follow up with that.
We have to follow up.
And so you determined through your analysis that the pole must be 176, couldn't be 156 some other height? I mean,
Well, it's also a matter what the carriers need and what we're trying to cover. So you got to think in terms of not only the highest carrier, but the lowest. And I'll show you a little analysis later, which kind of shows you how we evaluate that to see how the terrain impacts the tower. Because you don't want, the lowest carrier's not going to want to be in the trees. They're going to want to be at least 20 feet above the trees because it's all line of sight technology. So they're looking, they want to look down. And if they're looking through trees, that's going to attenuate that signal and it's not going to do you much good.
So, did you do any propagation studies?
We did. And
For the town?
not for the town equipment. So,
So you don't know if that's higher? At a given power, we can talk about what repeater strength. If they put 15-watt repeater, it's not going to be very much. But if they put a 25-watt repeater, or if they put a 50-watt repeater, you haven't said that, and I haven't seen any promulgation study that says that even if I were to believe that the right thing to do is to put a carrier on this thing, right? I haven't seen any promulgation studies that say it'll take care of the root one corner. I haven't seen any promulgation study that says right now. I read all the material he sent out twice. Right? First thing I want to know is how far it's going to reach. How far? I'll be right. I don't give a shit if the AT&T's on or Verizon's on. I care about somebody at the beach, right, who needs help, has an ambulance, and that ambulance can call and get help. Call the hospital from the beach. A lifeguard can call from the beach. Somebody at the Blueberry Plains can call. That's what I care about. I care about the public safety. I don't care about the rest of the stuff. This is one of the problems with this proposal. I'll be right up front, right? I don't know if it's a public safety proposal or if it's a commercial proposal. If it's a commercial proposal, fine. Let's be honest about it.
well, we also have to,
Let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. This is
Sure.
a commercial proposal. Now let's get public safety, their own antenna, and we'll get in trouble. The other thing about this proposal that's really, without the promulgation studies, is there's been talk about the state of Maine moving to truncated systems, microwave systems for public safety. I haven't seen anything about that in this proposal. Are we building something for today, or are we building something, is the town building something for 10 years? This town, my opinion on this, right, and it reflects nothing about anybody else, and even reflect what my wife thinks, right? This town has a habit of building for now and not the future.
So I think we can, with the public safety piece, I think we can talk about that like at the next time we get together. We have a bunch of those studies that we did, we put in for federal funding back in the last CDS round. And so we looked at microwave systems and all the other things. So like I think those are things we can talk about. With notwithstanding that, having a redundant backup system is what would be lacking anyway. So even if we went and got approved for the $5.5 million we asked for to build a microwave system, you still have to address the fact that there's no other redundant system.
Exactly. Right?
So what we have, so I guess we're getting at it, we can certainly go through for people that are interested in the studies that have already been done, because we did that with the Air National Guard's communication wing, amongst some other suppliers, to specifically look at public safety.
Well, what I'm trying to get to.
I get where you're getting at, but the problem is,
If this is a public safety thing, make it a public safety thing, and give the police, the fire, the lifeguards, and public works the tools they need to be separate. If this is a commercial thing, and this is what we're trying to do, it's a commercial thing, then let's see the promulgation studies that show that it's going to take care of the Route 1 problem, it's going to take care of the Verizon Beach problem, it's going to take, let's see the promulgation studies.
all right, so you covered a lot of terrain, but I'm going to try and answer as much of that as I
Can
can.
you restate the questions?
Sure. So one of the questions was, how high are these public safety antennas? We do 20 feet just because from a structural loading standpoint, from what we see around, we just have a standard size, and we also want to plan that out from an FAA standpoint. But in the real world, they range. So we do a lot of antennas that are only 4 feet high. They're only like an inch or so, and they're 4 feet. We do some, they tend to average at around 10 to 11 feet, and we see some that are 20 feet. So we do see the full range of antennas depending on what the town wants to put at the site. Visibility-wise, they don't really matter because they're very hard to see compared to the pole and the cellular antennas, which tend to be wider. So that's that. As far as the public safety aspect of it, I would also argue that, I understand that you want your public safety systems, the police, the fire, EMS, to be able to talk using the tower from long distances. But there's also a public safety aspect to having cell service. Most of 911 calls today is on cell phones. So if someone's in an accident on the side of the road, most people don't have landlines in their house anymore. If they do, they have internet-based packages. So if power goes out, they lose their phone as well. So a lot of people rely on cell phones for 911. And I could say I've had, probably even in the last year, a number of personal family emergencies, including myself, who had an allergic reaction, allegedly to lobster, but it turned out to be okay. But as I proved out again tonight before I came here. So having the ability to make that phone call, we couldn't make a phone call on the side of the road. So the tower that we're building in Rhinebeck, that we just built, which isn't even on air yet, we couldn't make a call. And so that's a very important feature, is having the ability for people to call 911 on their cell phones. Well, I'm getting to that.
Who owns that cell tower that people call in? It's not public safety. It's owned by Verizon, AT&T.
Dish and T-Mobile.
Those are the people that own that, right?
So we own the tower.
No, but the system that.
The system that goes on top of the tower, the public safety trunking, is owned by the town.
Well, my point is, I don't think we should have, I want public safety to have their own tower. That way they can, right? My point is, if AT&T wants to fix this problem, they should put their own tower on someplace they can negotiate with the town. I'm not even sure that's the right place for the tower, because I haven't seen any propagation steps.
So let me tell you about propagation. So propagation, the lower the frequency, the farther it's going to travel. So the wireless carriers now use several different bands, but your everyday cell coverage is in the 700 megahertz band. They also use what they call the PCS band, which is like 1900 to 2100, that band. And they use that mostly for capacity. It doesn't travel very far. When Sprint came out, they were all at 1900. They needed a lot more sites than everybody else, and it wound up being a lot more expensive than the companies like AT&T or Verizon. So public safety antennas tend to be at a much lower frequency. So typically 400 megahertz, even 155 megahertz. So that's much lower. So what you see is that if you get a coverage in an area that a cell carrier has, your public safety antennas will certainly work there and also work well beyond there. They're only going to be limited by the terrain. So if you put a site in a bowl, the sides of the bowl will stop your signal, no matter what you are, public safety, cellular. So we can run a propagation study, and I'm happy to do that. So if you just tell me, okay, we're running a 155 megahertz system at this power, we can update our plots and we'll show you how far that will travel, but it will travel quite a bit further than the cell carriers. The carriers love the lower frequencies for themselves. They took over some of the TV channels so that they can get more of that 600 megahertz spectrum.
Just to add,
The higher spectrums don't work very well.
so when we were doing some of the preparation work and when we were putting the RFP together and we were looking at the site, we were working with the consultant that public safety uses to evaluate their needs. So hold on. So the considerations for their equipment's performance were built into what we were doing with this project. And I'm sorry that they can't be here tonight to answer questions directly. I do want to get to other questions you have, but we're at 7 o'clock, and I think John still has some more of the structured presentation. I do want to get to that, and I also want to open it up to other questions. So let's just at least put this on the side. We'll finish the formal presentation, and then we can do some more questions. Okay?
Well, just one comment, all right?
Yep.
When you use the person, I think there was an ethical problem in the Southern Maine with the consultant. They have a piece of the pie and they want to keep it.
I think we can, again, kind of explore some of these issues later, and we'll take them one by one.
Right. Sam brought up a good point also. So the public safety agencies also use cellular for their internal radio systems. In particular, AT&T, they've got the FirstNet award. So that's a band that they use for, you can use it for commercial purposes, but it has priority so that in a public emergency, that system is dedicated. Because the last thing you want to have is, a lot of phone calls that jam up the network and nobody can get through. So that's a dedicated network called FirstNet that AT&T is deploying nationwide. So that's an important feature with the wireless carriers. Some of the other carriers also have variations on that because they're trying to compete for public agency funding. I know Verizon is used in a lot of police vehicles for the computer systems, so we see a lot of that around. And T-Mobile just came out with some other public safety competitor to FirstNet. We don't know where that's really going, but public safety folks, police, fire department, they very often use cellular services as part of their everyday job.
And I'd like to point out, AT&T's antennas integrate FirstNet. It is up to the prerogative of the municipality to use it or not, they have to leave you. So you're boosting FirstNet.
Yeah, there was an opt-in. I think everyone is opt-in at this point, but anyway, I just have a few more slides, and I've got some propagation maps we can talk about. These are just some examples of town systems. So this is a typical equipment building. This is actually the same building in the drawings before it left the factory, but we plan out where to put the cabinets and all the equipment, the air conditioners, fire suppression, cable ports. We provide that whole system. And on a smaller scale, if an agency just wants to put a couple of small pieces of equipment or a repeater, we have cabinet designs that can be put at a site. This is some examples of municipal systems. This particular one, there were 7 public safety systems involved in this tower. It's in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and it's right next to the town hall. And you can see this happens to be I believe it's 175 or 180 foot tower, public safety at the top and also below. And then we have 2 carriers, we actually have 3 carriers installed. This picture, the third one hadn't installed yet. But here's a typical rack at the top. They wanted a particular configuration, which we provided. There's the public safety shelter. We use a company called Enviro Building. We've worked with many years. We like their product. And here's a generator. I forget which one it was. I think it was a Kohler. This shows the ground equipment. In this particular case, the town was going to be paving this parking lot, and so we installed pretty fancy bollards that they can lift up and pave around. And so that will be nicer aesthetics than just your standard yellow painted concrete bollard. So a little bit about radio frequency safety. It's always a big question, are cell towers safe? So we have an analysis that we provide. Typically when a wireless carrier comes into an application, or we're going to a public application with a wireless carrier, they'll provide an analysis of their particular equipment. But we like to include all the carriers into one consolidated report. So we have a company called PeerCon Solutions. They're independent radio frequency companies. They're independent from the wireless carriers. They provide our coverage plots, and they also provide the EMF studies. So here you see that the results with all the major carriers on there was only 18% of the FCC permissible levels. So it's pretty far below. And the chart below just shows you how it really works. It's based on the distance. So the further you get away from the site, the less. So it practically drops to 0 at 2,000 feet. It's also pretty close to 0 right at the tower because the antennas are up in the air and they're facing outward. And again, this is all worst case analysis. If you would actually go out and measure that same tower, it would be a fraction of that because it's very conservative assumptions when they do these.
Excuse me, just before you get away from that, I'm kind of assuming that those measurements are taken at the ground level, the same ground tower is at, and if you were, say, 50 feet higher on Winter Street or 80 feet higher on Summer Street, you might be more in the line of that radiation.
That's right. So this is just based on an average ground level. So they assume, now typically when they do these things, they'll do like 2 levels. They'll do like first floor and second floor type of analysis. But they don't factor in that there's a little hill and there's a house on that hill. But the levels are still going to be below. So even at the worst case distance, you're only 18%.
I mean, can you provide that type of analysis to respond to that question? That at that higher elevation on Winter Street, Park Street, Grove Street, that it's negligible or below FCC standards? I mean, can you do that? I mean,
Sure.
Yeah.
So what we would do in that case, again, this is something that will provide a full report during the planning process. And at that point, we can have them look at, all right, let's look at that 2,000-foot radius and see if there are any bumps or homes that are risen. And instead of using 16 feet, because it's a second floor, or 10 feet because it's the first floor, they could use that elevated, position. So what's the worst case scenario? They could look at that. But this is just a generic.
I mean, what's your experience? If this most likely won't be an issue, given your
Well,
I mean, you've done a lot.
It will not be an issue. It's another way to think about it is when you have a cell phone in your hand, that cell phone is talking to the tower just like the tower is talking to the cell phone. It's the same energy going back and forth. One isn't higher than the other. So the power that your phone is giving out is the same as the power that the tower is giving it. You're experiencing the tower. It's a two-way street.
You say that information would be available, I'm assuming the view simulation would also be available at the same time. Would that be after the town is voted or before the town is voted?
So typically, the first process is get to a lease. That basically allows us to get the carriers on board, and then once we know who the carrier is going to be, what their equipment is, then we go through the planning and zoning process.
I think that's an excellent question, because I've been thinking about that, like the visual study, it'd be nice to have the visual study done before the vote happens. And similarly, the safety analysis and other stuff, it'd be nice to get some of that information, maybe not fully baked, but I think it would be helpful.
Maybe a way to try to answer the question is, provided a successful vote on the amendment in June, typically with your other clients, how long does it take to conclude the land lease after that?
Usually the land lease is the very first thing we do. So in most instances, once we have an award, then we get into a lease negotiation. And if it's a private landlord, it's pretty quick. If it's a governmental agency, it could be a couple of weeks, could be a couple of months. So it all depends on the site. We just signed a lease with University of Massachusetts, and that took a very long time to get through all the procedures.
So this is assuming a lot of votes and public process not in evidence yet, but with a successful zoning amendment with a June vote and a couple-month negotiation of a land lease, we'd be looking at a November 25 town vote of the land lease. So then the question would be, what kind of information would the public have about some of these issues in advance of a November 25 vote on the land lease?
So it's tricky, and the timing is tricky. So it's also that, first thing is, in order for us to engage the wireless carriers, now, we've gotten some information about AT&T, they've been very helpful, but in order for us to actually get them to provide, make an application, give us the exact information that they're going to be putting at the site, we need to have our ground lease. So we have to have the ground control, because otherwise they won't really take it serious. Carriers also work in budget cycles. So the carriers release their budgets, let's say November, they're putting which sites they're going to be planning for the next year. It's like an 18-month cycle with the carriers. So the good news here is that in terms of at least AT&T, we know they have a long history of looking for sites and talking to the town. So I think they're going to be ready to go sooner than other carriers coming in from scratch. But we'd want to we wouldn't want to go through the planning and zoning process until we have the carrier signed up. And because also, they won't provide a lot of the engineering support. It's just kind of a corporate process. So until we get the lease signed, they won't provide the corporate, the support that we need to go into zoning. So there's a lot of RF justification, a lot of really detailed analysis that they provide, testimony, things like that.
And I'm kind of going through this as much from my own understanding, but so it sounds like those types of details would not be ready in part because you need the land lease accepted to market it to the carriers. And once that happens, they come back with details that'll inform that type of analysis. So it seems that the public exposure to how to look at that analysis and give feedback would happen through the permitting process and not through the vote for the.
Yeah, and I don't particularly like that scenario. I mean, that's me personally, because, as things unfold, the town vote is an opportunity for the community, not me, but the community to help make a decision about how this project moves forward. That is an opportunity. Planning board, you have less sort of leverage on the planning board as it relates to, approval and denial of a project. They're gonna review the project based upon the ordinance, and they're gonna check those boxes. And so, to be fair, the town vote is an opportunity for the community to make a decision. Is this the right project in the right location to move forward? So I like to get more information before the town vote, quite frankly.
Now, there's certain things that we can do, and it's all a matter of cost, because generally speaking, if you think of, if you were the investor in this project, and you say, well, okay, how much are you going to spend without having a lease in place? Normally our investors like to have a carrier's lease in place, and they certainly like to have a ground lease in place before they spend any more than a nominal amount. A lot of this type of work we do internally, we do on our own, at our own expense, and then once it gets closer to the planning stage, where we have to do surveys and drawings and all kinds of engineering studies, it gets very expensive pretty quick. So by the time we're actually making a planning application, we're probably over $50,000 invested in the program. So we wouldn't want to be spending $50,000 if we didn't even have a lease yet. So the things that I could do, kind of crawling out on the risk branch, would be we could take a look at the propagation studies. We have a third party that does that without involving the carriers. We can show them what's the public safety coverage, like this gentleman's question, like what's the difference between the carrier's coverage, public safety coverage. We could provide an EMF report. We have this report, which is our stock report. They can revise that based on the actual town terrain. That's pretty easy stuff that we can do up front. The visibility, we've already done the visibility mapping. The next step is the balloon test and photo simulations. We could do a balloon test. It's tricky because, particularly in the winter, if there's more wind, it's hard to hold a 176-foot balloon on a string, stable. So sometimes we'll go up and put a crane, but you can't get back there with a crane because you're in the middle of the woods. So we have to hope there's a very low wind day, put it up, and then folks from the town can go around. And at that point, we'll have that viewshed map updated with pinpoints on the most likely viewpoints. I mean, we cover every street anyway. So within that 2-mile radius, we'll literally drive every street to see if there's just an opportunity that maybe the mapping analysis didn't pick up.
Do you have that issue whether it's the winter of now or the winter next year, 2026?
It's always best to do it in the winter, and maybe that's something we want to do before the leaves get on the trees now. Because I don't want to wait until the next winter to do that analysis. Because I also want to have to keep, the carriers' schedule, their budget cycles, their builds, change pretty quickly. So if I've got carriers willing to commit now, I don't want to wait till next year to get them on the hook, because that budget could go away. Or they may say, well, I've got to put a budget somewhere. I can't build in 2025. I'll put that into another town. And that's what they have. There's many more towns that need coverage than there's the budget for the carriers. Massachusetts, you might have 400 towns, but they only have budget to build 50 sites. So you're kind of competing with other towns.
Just want to see if I'm understanding that correctly, that the highest radiation exposure is about 600 from the power consistent with the majority of residences on Park Road and River Street?
So generally, yes. But we also have to keep in mind is that when the engineers that do this, they take all these assumptions and they add them all up in the worst possible combination. So let's say AT&T's, if you looked at just AT&T, and okay, I'm just making this up, randomly, but let's say at AT&T at 500 feet there, that's where their signal maxes out. But maybe you look at T-Mobile and theirs maxes out at 1,000 feet because of how they're pointing their antennas and because of the particular frequencies. So there's two cases where the max is completely different areas. But what the engineers do is they say, all right, we'll take the max from both, add it together. So it's not even a realistic calculation. That's why when you go in the real world, you actually measure it with a meter, you don't get anything close to that.
Will you be monitoring after the project's built as it relates to exposure?
Generally, we don't do that.
It has been done before.
If a carrier is compliant, and they'll have to demonstrate that they're compliant, and they have to be compliant under the FCC regulations, then there's no monitoring necessary. We generally don't monitor. Now, we could ask a carrier, listen, install, and again, this is lease language that you have to create. And after you're installed, go out and do an actual field measurement.
Yeah.
But if I go to the carrier and say, oh, by the way, you got to go out every year, every 6 months and measure it,
What's the downside of doing that?
because it
Yeah,
costs
cost,
thousands of
cost,
dollars. It
cost,
costs like,
cost, right?
right.
It's cost.
It's like, okay, every year I got to spend $5,000 or someone to go out and make a measurement, issue a report. They'll say, see you later.
Seems like from a safety perspective, it's worth it.
But if they do a calculation, which is, the calculation is governed by a document called OET 65. So that everyone can't calculate it differently. They put the frequency in, they put the power levels in, and it calculates what it is. If that level comes out to be 4% of the standard, why would you spend money to go out and measure that? If it was 98% of the standard, you'd say, okay, you're kind of on the border. Maybe you want to double check that. But if it's only 4%, you wouldn't bother.
Can you provide some information about that kind of thing? You obviously know what you're talking about. I mean, it's your business. I don't know the business, but apparently there are projects that are required to do monitoring in the country. And so
I could talk to the carriers about that. They might be willing to do one-time initial monitoring, and that's something that maybe the town puts on a condition of the approval that right up to building, there's a monitoring. But are you going to wait till multiple carriers install, or are you just going to do it with the first carrier and see what it's at? It's just,
I have no idea.
yeah.
That's not my problem.
I could tell you that we have, we do a lot of rooftop work. So you go on a rooftop, the antennas are right there. I'm put on a bulkhead. So I've gone up, I have a safety meter, and we set the meters to a certain level. So you say, I want to measure that, the thing will beep if it gets 20%. So 20% of the FCC public level is where I want the alarm to go off. I'm still okay, but I just set a threshold. I've gone on rooftops, I've taken the meter, I've held them up to the carrier's antennas that were active, these large 6-foot antennas. And then I go back and download the data, and I get 13%. And that's standing with the thing held against the antenna. Now, with that tower, if you're staying right under that tower, even though you're not in the direction of the antenna, you're 170 feet away from that. So it's only a tiny fraction.
So if I look at the chart, it looks like the radiation is basically zero right up against the tower where you are holding your meter, so you would expect it to be low.
Because the antennas are over your head, and they're assuming it's facing outward. So there's nothing at the base of the tower. Actually, some of the worst cell coverage is at the base of the towers. You want to be, if you want a tower in your neighborhood to provide good service, you want it a little bit of a distance. So just a little bit about the existing towers in town. Then this will lead up to some coverage plots. So the site is right in the middle here. There's a water tank. I believe it's T-Mobile on there, and maybe Verizon. US Cellular, okay. So Water tanks don't make great structures because every now and then towns have to paint them, and now it's a big project. I know I'm doing 2 water tank paintings right now. It's a nightmare. All the antennas have to come off, you gotta paint it, it's a 6-month project. And then there's a tower up by the rest stop. I believe that, I know AT&T's on that one. I think everybody's on that one. There's another one down here off of, I forget the name of the road, but it's a side road right off the side of the highway. Everyone's there. There is a flagpole. Oh, there's another tower over here. Okay, this radius is 2 miles. So none of those towers are really going to provide effective coverage in the middle of town. And there's a small flagpole down toward Kennebunkport. Flagpoles are terrible because, especially that one, it's like only 2-foot diameter, very limited antennas in there. Carriers hate them. Some of the carriers have actually banned use of those in today's market. And there's also a broadcast tower, which I believe has 1 carrier on it, right down the hill.
What we should be thinking of?
Sorry?
Is a 2-mile radius what we should be thinking of as far as the coverage of that tower?
No, so these towers will cover, you know, a splotch around it. And I'll show you, I've got an example from AT&T to give you a good idea how that works. It's always best to have 2 towers covering you in a particular area because, like, as you drive through, you want a soft handoff. You don't want your phone to drop and then pick up again. So the carriers like to have multiple signals covering you at any one time. But this just shows you that you're really in a natural hole here. So this is a coverage plot we did with our consultants. We superimposed it on the topographic map. And I've got some other maps in a few seconds. And I've also indicated where those other existing towers are. So the outer yellow area, which really encompasses both areas, and the reason why it's kind of triangular is because the engineer was assuming that the antennas are facing one particular direction. So typically on a tower, you'll see antennas facing 3 ways. So this outer area represents, it's a negative 105 decibels. So that is, it's generally, you're outside, maybe you're in a vehicle, it's a basic type of cell coverage, not in a house or not in a commercial building. The green splotch is at 95 or 93 decibels, so that's considered in building. Every carrier uses different standards and all that, so it's going to vary. But from our generic standpoint, this dark green is what you would expect to be good quality coverage. And then out here is more kind of out and about in your car, walking around type coverage. So now we show on just a road map, same map, so you can probably get a better idea what roads it covers. But we did this analysis at 700 megahertz, which is that low band frequency that the carriers, that's kind of the classic wireless carrier frequency, at 170 feet, which is the top carrier position. So when we do this analysis, we want to see what's the top carrier going to see, what's the bottom carrier going to see, and if it's relatively equivalent, that's a good thing. If it drops down, the lower the carrier, the worse the coverage, it's less desirable. It also gives us an idea if we want to adjust the height of the tower. You know, will a lower tower do the same as a higher tower? Now this area is in a little bit of a bowl, but it's higher elevation up here to the northwest and lower as you get down closer to the beach, so it's like a semi-bowl. So the height of the tower does not really affect the coverage too much. So we really just want to be above the trees and get at least 4 carriers on there, maybe a public safety location below and the public safety location above.
So just so I'm clear about this graphic, this is the coverage that we would get if the tower was built. Is that correct?
Right, there's a generic coverage
So
that's,
this is the
yeah.
proposal, like with the tower, this is what you get. The
Yep.
green is like spot on great, I'm getting 5 bars, and the yellow's a little bit less, and so, okay.
Right.
Are your slides going to be available to us? Because I can't read that. Sorry.
Yes, and I can read it myself without reading that up close. But we do have a few sets outside. We provided the town with a PDF that Zoom you can distribute or put on your website, so it's available. So let me just go on. So that's at 170 feet. This is the coverage at 140 feet. So if 170 feet is the top carrier, 140 feet is the bottom carrier. So this will show you the range of those major carriers. And I can flip back and forth. You can see what the difference is. It's not a lot. So that tells me that all 4 carriers will have equivalent cell coverage from this tower.
You do it at 120?
Well, now I have to start worrying about the trees too.
Well, I know,
So,
I'm just
yeah.
curious, like 120, and like you don't see any green.
I think if you went down to one, whoops, let me go back.
Yeah.
If you were to go to 120, let's see, 40, it would pull in. I mean, it would pull a little, you know, I don't think it would pull in dramatically.
Yeah.
But the other thing I think about, you got to balance against the visibility too. So the visibility in this location is really good. Because of the way it's buried in the trees, the higher tower is not really hurting you from a visibility standpoint. And the balloon test will prove that out. We've done balloon tests with towns where they go around and people spend the whole day, it's like, I didn't even see the tower at all. So I would say, I told you you should have driven with us, we'd show you the spots. But, so then we do a second range of frequencies. So the carriers use the 700 megahertz band, which is kind of their stock cell and text band, coverage. But they also have higher frequencies, the so-called PCS frequencies, that are in the 1900 to 2100 megahertz. Some even go up to 2400. So the carriers these days are using the 2100 megahertz bands as capacity because they don't really have enough capacity at the lower bands. So everyone's, doing TikTok or Netflix on their phone. That eats up a lot of data, and it would saturate the network pretty quickly if they didn't have other bands. So they use these 2100 megahertz bands. But you can see the lower frequencies, the higher frequency is much lower. So this is analogous to what we were talking about earlier with the public safety, because if you go the other way, if you go from 700 up to 154 or 400, it's going to go way out.
John, we're at 7:30, and we've done a pretty good job of incorporating questions.
Hmm?
But just because we also want to clean up for our library friends, I just want to make sure we get everything you want included, but then also have kind of a wide open at the end.
So I got 5 minutes of this, and then we're done.
Great.
All right, so this is, again, the range for the 2100. It just shows you, like, the higher quality coverage. Now, AT&T just provided maps. I literally got them about an hour before we got here. So this is the existing coverage that AT&T has. Now, they use slightly different levels. So they're more conservative on street coverage versus in-building coverage. They would probably say, well, we want a higher level experience, and therefore we're not using the other ranges. But you can see that they're on this tower by the rest stop. They're on this other tower over here. They're way down here. And they're on that flagpole down at Kennebunkport. And right in the middle, they've got a big empty gap. So that shows that AT&T has no real coverage in the area. And all the carriers are probably going to be very similar because there's no other sites in the area. So I think everyone's going to have the same plots. So when you add the site, that's what you get from AT&T's perspective. So what you're getting, now this splotch is a little bit smaller than my splotch because they're using different levels. So this is, I think all of this, including the orange and the green, is all pretty good high quality coverage, including in building. You see it doesn't quite connect up with like the beach area, whereas I think you're really going to get coverage all the way down, at least in vehicle coverage. So that's pretty much what AT&T is showing us that the site will do in their network. Then this is just a wrap-up slide. I won't bother going over the details, but our benefits to the town, and then Q&A.
John, thanks very much. And like I said, I think we did a pretty good job of hopefully covering all the high-level points, but also letting people take sidetracks for more specific questions. We don't have anything else canned ready for you. Hopefully you saw the extensiveness of how much public process is still ahead. But we have some opportunity now, so if there's follow-up questions. Yep. Do you want to pass the mic, Tina, or do you think he just restates them? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can't really hear it, it's not on the mic.
Can we pass over the mic?
No, you keep yours and I'll just move this.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? First, let me say thank you very much for paying attention to the time, because we do have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, is my understanding, so thank you. I think some of us share a concern that there's going to be a lot of information available after decisions are made, votes are made. But I just wanted to say, like, I went out to the tower that's out by the Turnpike, and there were lights on it. There were lights on the base buildings, like, and this was late at night. This was like 11 o'clock at night. And there was this hum coming off of it from a transformer kind of a thing. So I want to say that I heard him say there will be no lights on the tower up high. And I'd really like to get some sort of feeling about ground level lights. I can understand a security issue, but I don't want to be looking out and seeing light bouncing up into our houses. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Sam was talking in my other ear, so I didn't get most of it.
So I'll just say that I do know that that's a much older installation, and I think that John covered this earlier. He might elaborate now. There's no plans for lights on top of the tower. And do you want to talk a little bit about any lighting that might be needed for the base or accessory buildings?
So the carriers typically put a work light out there, so if they have to go out at night, they can turn on a work light. It's typically on a timer, and it's just usually like one floodlight facing their cabinet.
And there's also...
The question I had was about basically a 60-cycle hum coming off the transformers at the base. And I apologize for giving up the mic and continuing to ask questions, but who will we call at 10 o'clock at night when we're upset about lights coming off of it or sounds coming off of it? Would that be somebody in your organization? Would we call?
So if there's some sort of noise coming off a site or something that we need to be alerted to, you can call us. We have a 24-hour live service so you can call and someone will get to one of us. I respond a lot to calls at 3 a.m., all sorts of various things. There shouldn't be any noise from the transformers, no different than any other transformer, commercial, utility transformer. So that would be a utility company problem. But certainly we would be the first stop to call, then we would contact them and make them aware of it. But it shouldn't be making any noise.
John, maybe you can clarify, and I'm not saying that you know the details of the site at the Turnpike. There will be a transformer at the site that we're proposing here?
There will be. So it's either usually going to be a pad mount transformer, generally a fairly small one, something like maybe 3-foot transformer, or it could be a pole top transformer, much like you have in neighborhoods. It really depends on what the local utility wants to do. We do both of those.
Couple, I have actually a lot of questions, but I don't want to hog the mic. But one, maybe this is a Chris question. So when I look at both town mapping and state mapping, it notes that the property is under it's designated as main conservation property. Is that a mislabeling or is that accurate? And if it is accurate, does it have any restrictions?
Yeah, so if you look at the state GIS map of conservation, it lumps it all together. So anything that's whether it's state conserved, land trust conserved, or town park, they all show up as green. We filter that out with different levels of protection. So that doesn't mean it can't do something. Probably what's happening is this, you've got the land trust mountain reserve back there, and you've got the skate park across the street. You might see something that looks like it's all intertwined. It doesn't assume you can't do something. It means it's got to be paid attention to the review process.
So it's something that needs to be clarified at some point, that it's, that it doesn't have constraints, given, okay, fair enough, because I think that should happen. So I assume this
project will require meeting Article 7 special exceptions, right? Right, and are you aware of those exceptions? I mean, I don't know that, probably everybody here doesn't know those requirements. It actually has a lot of things that you need to do as part of all the things we just talked about. So, you know, I'd like to kind of walk through it a little bit and just get your opinion about each one. It's not, I mean, you know,
Maybe
not.
a brisk walk.
What's up?
Maybe a brisk walk.
Just a quick one about things, like,
And
you know,
just so you know,
about,
when we
what's required. You need to minimize adverse impacts, you know, visual impacts, property impacts, you know, as it relates to the project. This is specifically for telecommunication facilities. That's what this standard, this project needs to meet. And so I'll just go through a few of them that I think, you know, are, for me, are important. You know, in terms of, you know, the site itself, that, you know, tree preservation. I mean, I know it's kind of this weird thing, right? You want to keep trees, right? Because you want to buffer it as much as possible, but you're going to have to clear trees, let's be honest, right? I don't know how many trees you're going to have to clear. They talk about trying to minimize clearing of mature trees, so I think you're going to have a little bit of a
We're going to have to
challenge.
clear everything on the far
You're gonna have
side
to
of that utility line.
Right, so there's going to be a challenge there. I also, related to sort of comment about lights, maybe there won't be lights. I mean, I looked at pictures and you've got the chain link fence going around the facility. Buffering, I think, you know, again, this is more of a site plan issue, right? I think buffering's going to be required. I mean, we have a town spent a lot of money on a skateboard park. We got a lot of kids down there. Quite frankly, it's busy as hell down there. And spent a lot of money on building a sidewalk on Factory Pasture. I don't think people want to see the industrial buildings that exist there. And so I think, you know, pretty robust landscaping buffering program, ground level, makes sense to me, you know, as part of the, and it is required within that Article 7. Again, I don't want to dominate discussion. There's a lot of stuff in this about requirements that you need to meet in terms of the landscape plan, a visual impact analysis with a landscape architect and graphics within 500 feet, 2,500 feet that needs to be done. You know, and so I think you need to, you know, I'd like to, you know, I mean, obviously you need to do that as part of the planning board process. And then, you know, it talks about proposing, you know, looking at other tower locations. And I know you replied to a specific RFP that the town ultimately gave you to look at that only site. But this is saying, what about other sites in town? Are there any sites that are better? That should be part of the review. Have you ever thought, you probably haven't thought about that, given you were probably looking at a specific requirement in the RFP, but this does speak to that a little bit. So I think you're gonna have to go there, you know, I mean.
So that type of justification is generally, the burden is on the wireless carrier. So from my perspective, you know, our landlord is the town. If they tell us this is where we want the site, that's what we develop. We're not looking at other properties because they've designated that property. When a wireless carrier goes out, it's a little bit different. If they're looking at private properties, a lot of towns during the planning process will say, well, sometimes it's a game of where else can you go, right? It's like, if you go there, then they want to know why you didn't go here and vice versa. But they'll vet those properties. They'll say, and AT&T actually gave me a good amount of information in their initial scrubs over the last couple of years. They said, well, we looked at this property, looked at this tower. And so I already have a feel on why those things were eliminated. But the real story is if you look at the map where the sites, where they are, and you look at everything in the middle, there really is nothing in the middle. I think there was one historic building they looked at, and they couldn't do it for historic reasons, but there's no structures that they can use. And so therefore, it's not like, okay, we can go down and, you know, use an existing tower. If it was already there, they'd be on it already.
Yeah, I just think, you know, again, I think you're going to have to go, you know, speak to that in some sort of application.
We
when
will.
you do that, right? And it's just a little bit of a, you know, and Steve knows this, that for me, there was a master plan that identified specific locations for cell towers. This site was not selected as part of that master plan. I don't know if you read that master plan before, or that the town prepared for cell towers. This site wasn't selected, and so it sort of evolved organically, not through the master plan process. And so to me, this is the Article 7 just says that you need to sort of do that as part of making sure, you know, this site's the right site. So I just you know,
Sure. And there's kind of two different levels that we deal with on approval. So There's always the local level with a set of regulations and what they want to, in the code, what's required in application. And sometimes it's quite extensive. You know, we've done applications where there's 50 things you have to respond to, and the application is 2 inches thick. On top of that, we have another layer that we have to comply with under the federal regulations. There's the NEPA regulations in Section 106. So under that, there are 8 agencies. So we have to go out and we do have to do a study of the property. And some of this is parallel with the town requirements, but it's a separate process that we have to go through. It takes about 5 months, but we have an environmental consultant that goes out. They study the property, all the surrounding properties. They do an archaeological study. They consult with all the Indian tribes. They consult with the Department of Interior, the FAA. I mean, there's 8 different agencies that they have to go to. There might be a dozen Indian tribes that have to go to on top of that. And they gather all those comments, and they do all that analysis. And we can't build a tower unless we pass all that. And again, a lot of times there's overlap with the town requirements, but typically the town requirements have even more. So one of those is SHPO, so State Historic Preservation Office. So that's where you get a lot of overlap with the visibility. The SHPO office may say, well, give us your visuals, or they always want an archaeological report. It used to be rare, now they want it every time, so we have to do that. It's a whole separate report. So we have to get through historic preservation before we can put a shelf in the ground.
I'm sure people have other questions.
Endangered species too, another thing. We have to make sure there's no.
The environment, yeah, because there's stuff there, so I'm sure people have other questions. I don't want to hog the mic.
And just to tag on to what John's saying here, we like working with the municipalities, we understand the community, right? We're hearing what you have to say. If we went to an industrial site, we just have to meet the requirements of zoning. So we wouldn't hear about it.
Sam, just to clarify, so the special exemption that Tom brought up means that these are part of it, regardless of the allowed use.
With the other sides, we wouldn't want to do that. We want to work with a private landlord or a commercial property. Should be here to make these comments. There's something we have to say. We take that into consideration. So we do that with someone who owns industrial land. We put an application in, put a notice. Not that we would, but in general, we can tell them.
I mean, there's really 2 levels. There's the town as landlord under the lease, and there's the town as the reviewing agency for the permits. And so the land lease is really kind of the first checkpoint, because we can't get to the second one unless we get through the first one.
Other questions?
I can answer more. Well, you had a lot here.
Hi, thank you. Could you quickly outline your relationship with the town and then with the cell carriers or the other users of the tower that you're going to build?
Sure. So with the town, we're landlord-tenant. So we're the tenant, town's the landlord. With the carriers are our subtenants. So we're the landlord in that case, and the carrier is the tenant, called a subtenant. So we have a lease with the town, that's called the prime lease. And then under that, we write a lease with each carrier for their particular installation.
And what is the term of the lease with the town?
So 50 years is the typical term. And then the carriers, it's carrier by carrier, but carriers run right now 30 to 45 years.
Do you have contingency plans should technology change so that cellular service is no longer as it is today? And what are your contingency plans or are your stranded costs if that technology gets replaced by something else?
So there's a couple ways to address that. One thing is that over time, and I've been doing this for about 30 years, more towers have been used. So as technology has advanced, it hasn't been replaced. There's no satellite solution that's going to take it away, or a small cell solution that's going to take the cell tower away. You actually need more cell towers. As there's more data on those networks, you actually need to infill. So sometimes carriers have to put micro installations to fill in coverage. It's really capacity issues. So it's no longer becomes a coverage problem, it's capacity. So carriers are building sites for capacity as well. So we've seen the trend to be more and more towers, not that towers are being phased out. But we're still running a business, and we rely on the rents that come in from the carriers, and they're very stable customers. It's not like a commercial office building where tenants come and go every year. They sign leases. They generally tend to stay unless they consolidate, but they still stay one way or the other. If for some bizarre reason the carriers don't need the site anymore, they all go away, then at that point, we do have a removal clause in the lease, so we're obligated to remove the tower. Some ordinances actually have something built into the ordinance as well, where they say if the tower is abandoned, it's not used in such a period of time, then you're also required to take it out. So you have the requirement in the lease, but there's also a requirement as a condition of your approval under the code. And I put the one asterisk on that is that if the carriers were to go, the question is the town still using it, or some public safety agency still using the tower? Because at that point, we'd say to the town, we're not making any money on it. What do you want to do? Do you want to just take over the tower? Or do you want us to take it down? So it's a kind of a town choice at that point. I've never seen it happen.
Thank you. The reason I asked this is we had a cable TV company start cable TV in the town of Kennebunk many years ago. And that technology went away and was replaced with something else, but the tower did not go away. They merely adapted it for other use, which was outside the original intention of that. And eventually, if technology changes to the point where it won't be used, but there might be another technology that would come in that could be used on that tower, does your lease cover that changes in technology so you maintain the use of the tower, whether the town likes it or not?
So the tower is just a piece of infrastructure. What goes on the tower, to us, certainly the carriers are the major tenants in this market, but there are certainly other tenants as well. If there's tenants that come in the future, maybe someone, for example, a few years back it was very popular to do high-speed trading. So companies would come in, they would put microwave dishes on your tower, and they would high-speed trade across the country, and they could be able to beat the ticker time in Wall Street. By microseconds, to make, who knows how much money. So you never know what's going to come along. The tower is just a piece of structural steel. We tend to over-design it structurally. We put a heavy thumb on the scale so that I'm not worried about other tenants coming out or even the carriers upgrading. If you go back 20 years, the carriers had 6-pound antennas. They were 4 feet high, and they weighed like 6 pounds. So now the antennas are 100 pounds, they're 6 to 8 feet tall, and they're that big. And they've got all this other radio equipment that they put up there. So they don't put big giant cables up to the tower anymore. They have small fiber cables going up. So it's an evolving technology, and that's also part of the business model. So as the carriers increase loading on the tower, they get more use of it, but then we can charge them more rent for that added loading. Because the tower is a finite resource. It's like if you build a 6-story building, unless you build an extension, you really can't build more tenant spaces. So as they use up the capacity, they have to pay more rent.
Thank you.
And I think that, we've got some good conversations still to be had. I think we are near the end of our limit in terms of our hosts and making sure that we can close up and allow the library staff to head home. So one thing that I encourage folks to do is to follow up with me. There's a business card by the exit. I'll have information available so you can reach Wireless Towers directly if that's something that's of interest to folks. And again, there's a meeting on March 10th for the planning board. That's not related to a lot of the topics we covered tonight, but it certainly has, it's a key aspect of the project and sort of a next step for this in terms of trying to move the project forward.